Hey, Composing Gloves here, and in this MIDI music theory, we're going to talk about note lengths. So, it's a little interesting. I'm not going to get ahead of the other series. So, we're going to talk about note lengths in a conventional sort of manner with the grid. So, this is something that I learned from stuff I already knew. So, once I understood how it linked up, it was great. Like, I was super fast at this. But if you're brand new, then you have no prior link. So it'll be kind of interesting to see how some of you guys develop in your knowledge of theory, starting with the piano grid rather than conventional music theory. So first off, this is a quarter note. So you can tell it's a quarter note. This is I guess it's more intuitive in a way. So this is 4 beats, right? Every time we have a line here, this is a beat. Do, 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 do. And these little lines are beats you can imagine them as tiny beats. They're called subdivisions. So we have our measure and it's being broken up so that we can then begin to write music in these terms of ratios that sort of go on. So right now, this is taking up 1 beat because there's 4 beats. So we call this a quarter note. If we want a half note, you simply extend it out. Now it's a half note. A whole note takes all of them. But then we have this weird one in the middle. What is that? This is called a dotted half note. Now, this is where I'm going to break away from music theory as note values. But just so you know, in future videos, I'm probably going to refer to them like that because it's a name I give for something that has 3 beats. The way you calculate a dotted note value is, and the reason they say that is because there's literally a dot next to the note saying now it's a dotted value. You take whatever your original value was, you cut it in half, and then you add half to the original value. And so in a half note, so you take a half note, cut it in half, so you get 1 beat, and then you add it together. You get 3 at the end. So for you, though, it's way more intuitive. You just draw a line that's 3 beats long, and you're done. Like, bang, done. So but just so you know, in music theory, there's not like a special symbol for 3. It just doesn't exist. They have these dotted systems that allow us to get to those. So they deal strictly with halves. It's kind of interesting now that I think about it. Now, if you go down again, so this is a quarter note. Go down again. This is a 8th note. This is a 16th note. So you can have 16 of these little boxes in one measure. Now, if you bring your grid snap size down to a half, you can go down again. This is a 32nd note, and you can have 32 of them in a measure. If you do it again, you go down to a third. These get into tuplets. We're not going to talk about tuplets right now. I'll talk about tuplets some other time. But they are very fundamental to things like big room and stuff like that. Tuplet rhythms are very common. So that is basic note values. I expect you to just sort of memorize them. So for you, this isn't going to be a huge deal. But when we talk about music theory and the rhythms behind it, rhythms and how we write out our rhythms, you're going to need to know this stuff. Like, you're going to need to know that this is a quarter note, or this is a quarter, and this is a half note. And I'm just going to throw these terms around. Now, I didn't talk about tuplets. That's where we get into this weird sort of triplet thing. We're not going to talk about that quite yet. And we did talk about dotted rhythms, which are sort of anything that's 3. But don't worry about that stuff too much. Just memorize those basic values, which shouldn't be very hard at all. And the reason this is valuable is because when we do get into rhythms, we'll start subdividing, which is when we start counting all the divisions. So normally we'd count a measure as 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And as our piece is going, a musician will do this in their head to help them keep in time with the music. And what they'll do to even help it be more accurate is they'll add in extra points. So they might only be playing a line like this, but they'll be saying 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, but they'll only be going da na na na, and they'll be counting that in their head, and that way it's perfectly in time, or a lot more accurate. It's easier to keep tempo with something that's a little more up to speed. So that's a valuable thing to know about and do, especially when you're just interacting with other musicians. But as a theorist, when you're learning music theory, this is going to become fundamental. When I start writing out stuff, I'm going to drop a quarter note here and a half note here and a whole note over here. A whole note just takes up 4 beats. It doesn't take up a whole measure. It's weird. It made sense in music land. It makes far less sense when you take it out of its context. So I'm not sure people, when they don't know any music, like I see people on Facebook all the time post tracks where, oh, I don't know anything about music and I posted this track and I'm always so curious to kind of see how they sort of developed from an understanding of the grid. The first time I saw this grid, I was like, this thing, you can write music with this thing. It blew my mind that you could do that, because I was used to this. I was used to just writing music on here, and I wanted a DAW that could do that, and I wound up with FL, which is one of the few DAWs that can't. Well, I guess there's a number of them that can't, but it's just kind of an interesting deal. If you have any questions, let me know. Memorize this jazz. It's valuable to you. Subscribe, and have a blessed day. So right off the bat, I'm using the beta of FL12. So because I want to use the new, I want to use the new citrus. So I want to use the vectoral citrus, because that's the one that's going to be the most recent. So it's the most relevant. I should be using that one. And I've been messing with it.